In times of crisis, the Federal Emergency Management Agency FEMA plays a crucial role in managing and mitigating the effects of disasters. However, most people are unaware of the extent of FEMA's powers and the measures they can legally take to ensure public safety and order. From essential supplies to personal vehicles, FEMA's authority to requisition items might surprise you. This video will uncover 10 surprising things FEMA can take from you during an emergency, shedding light on the breadth of their jurisdiction and how it impacts individuals in emergency situations. 10 Labor and services. In times of crisis, it might come as a shock to many that FEMA has the authority to commandeer personal labor and services. This means that in addition to requisitioning goods or property, the agency can also require individuals to perform certain tasks or duties, potentially disrupting their personal and professional lives. While this might be presented as a necessary measure to manage emergencies effectively, it raises concerns about personal freedoms and the potential for abuse of power. FEMA's ability to demand labor or services stems from provisions that allow the agency to mobilize needed resources rapidly during disasters. This could involve a wide range of skills and services, from medical professionals and construction workers to administrative personnel and first responders. In theory, this might seem justified in scenarios where specialized skills are urgently needed to save lives or restore essential services. However, the broad and somewhat vague nature of these powers means that people can be compelled to perform tasks against their will, which can lead to various ethical and practical issues. One of the major concerns is the lack of clear guidelines or boundaries regarding what types of services can be demanded and under what circumstances. This ambiguity can result in citizens being forced into labor that they are neither trained for nor capable of performing safely. For instance, expecting untrained individuals to participate in complex rescue operations or handle hazardous materials can endanger not only those individuals but also the people they are supposed to help. Additionally, such uncertainties can lead to a situation where people's professional responsibilities clash with forced labor demands, impacting their primary means of livelihood and possibly jeopardizing their financial stability. Moreover, the authority to requisition labor does not always account for personal circumstances and hardships individuals might be facing themselves. In a crisis situation, everyone is affected to some extent, and forcing people to work under duress could exacerbate their own adverse conditions. The psychological strain of dealing with a disaster, combined with the pressure to perform compulsory labor, could have lasting negative effects on mental health, adding another layer of collateral damage to the already suffering populace. The potential for misuse and enforcement overreach is another troubling aspect. Without adequate oversight and accountability, there can be instances where these powers are exercised disproportionately or discriminatorily. Marginalized communities could be at a higher risk of being unfairly targeted, further deepening social inequities. The history of emergency response efforts has shown that minorities, low-income families, and other vulnerable groups often bear a disproportionate share of the burden during crises. FEMA's labor requisition powers could, therefore, exacerbate existing inequalities and contribute to a cycle of systemic oppression. In addition to ethical and moral dilemmas, there are practical challenges related to logistics and implementation. Coordinating forced labor in a crisis is inherently complex and could lead to confusion, inefficiencies, and even legal ramifications. Mismanagement or poor planning in deploying requisitioned labor could undermine the very goals of the emergency response, creating bottlenecks and hindering the recovery process. Instead of empowering communities to rebuild and support one another, such measures might inadvertently stymie collective efforts and generate resentment and resistance from the public. 9. Housing. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is often associated with providing aid and support during natural disasters, but few people are aware of its broad authority to requisition personal residences in times of crisis. This little-known power enables FEMA to commandeer private homes, turning them into temporary shelters or command centers, ostensibly to better manage the emergency at hand. While this might appear to be a prudent measure aiming at the greater good, it generates significant hardship and distress for homeowners. The process by which FEMA requisitions a home can be jarring and invasive. Homeowners may receive little to no advance notice before FEMA officials show up on their doorstep with orders to vacate. Such abrupt displacement can result in a multitude of problems, ranging from logistical chaos to emotional distress for the affected families. Imagine the heartbreak of being forced out of your own home, especially when the world around you is already in turmoil. The crisis that necessitates such an action is usually dire enough, and being asked to leave one's sanctuary only compounds the trauma. Moreover, this barely considered aspect of FEMA's authority can have far-reaching financial consequences. Homeowners might have to bear the cost of temporary accommodations, even though they are forced out through no fault of their own. Compensation for requisitioned property, if provided, is often tied up in bureaucratic red tape, and the amount offered may not reflect the true loss incurred. Additionally, there can be significant damage to the property during its use by FEMA, further complicating the financial and emotional toll on homeowners. The aftermath for homeowners once FEMA departs is another dimension fraught with difficulties. The state in which the property is returned can vary drastically, and the organization's accountability for any damage incurred while using the residence is often minimal. Restoration efforts can be both costly and time-consuming, with many homeowners left to foot the bill for repairs. Meanwhile, they are deprived of their own living space, grappling with protracted periods of inconvenience. Further, the psychological impact of such displacement cannot be understated. A home represents safety and stability, particularly during a crisis. Being forced out disrupts a person's sense of security and can lead to long-term emotional issues such as anxiety and depression. Family dynamics, too, may be affected as the stress of displacement takes its toll on relationships. 8. Financial assets. In times of intense crisis, FEMA possesses the authority to freeze or commandeer financial assets, a surprising and alarming power that can have profound personal and societal repercussions. This action can encompass a wide variety of assets ranging from bank accounts and investment portfolios to retirement funds. For individuals who have spent their lives meticulously planning and saving for the future, the sudden seizure of these assets can be nothing short of devastating. The justification for such extreme measures is often framed in terms of maintaining order and ensuring resources are available for disaster response, but the implications are deeply unsettling. Primarily, financial assets can be frozen to prevent panic-induced withdrawals that might destabilize the economy or to redirect funds to emergency services. For example, during a significant national emergency, FEMA might argue that allowing unrestricted access to personal funds could lead to bank runs, exacerbating the financial instability inherent in any crisis situation. However, this paternalistic approach disregards the individual's autonomy and their inherent right to access resources they have legally earned and saved. The commandeering of financial assets places FEMA in a position of extraordinary power, effectively turning the agency into a gatekeeper of personal financial freedom during crises. Moreover, the contexts in which FEMA might exercise this power are worryingly broad and often poorly defined. Beyond natural disasters such as hurricanes, earthquakes, or floods, financial asset seizure could extend to situations deemed as national security threats or even public health emergencies. The lack of a clear and transparent threshold for these measures means that individuals might find their assets frozen even in circumstances where the direct threat to national stability is questionable. This ambiguity allows for wide-ranging interpretations that could lead to misuse or overly aggressive asset commandeering. FEMA's control over financial assets can disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations. Lower-income individuals and families, who may not have diversified assets or savings, could be hit hardest. While wealthier individuals might have means to safeguard or access resources through complex financial arrangements, those with straightforward savings or checking accounts could find themselves completely cut off from their lifeline. The resulting financial distress can lead to a cascade of other issues: inability to pay rent or mortgages, purchase necessary medications, or even buy essential food and supplies. Critics argue that FEMA's readiness to wield such power reveals a lack of empathy and understanding of the real-life repercussions for ordinary citizens. This is compounded by the fact that recovery from financial distress induced by asset freezing isn't instantaneous. Rebuilding one's financial standing after a crisis, particularly when personal savings have been commandeered, can take years, if not decades. The psychological stress generated by the loss of financial control can also be significant, with long-lasting impacts on mental health and wellness. 7. Personal identification documents. In a crisis, the Federal Emergency Management Agency wields extensive powers that can include the authority to seize personal identification documents. While the intention behind this measure might be to streamline rescue and relief efforts, the implications for individual security and privacy are alarmingly significant. During an emergency, FEMA might justify the confiscation of identification documents such as driver's licenses, passports, and social security cards under the guise of preventing fraud, verifying identities, or even consolidating efforts to assist displaced individuals. In theory, this could aid in the coordination of services, ensuring that resources reach the people who need them most. However, the reality of such actions often paints a different picture, revealing a darker side to FEMA's operations. Firstly, the seizure of personal identification documents can leave individuals particularly vulnerable. In the immediate chaos following a disaster, having access to one's identification is crucial for accessing a multitude of services, including financial resources, medical care, and shelter. Stripping people of their IDs can exacerbate an already dire situation, compounding their stress and potentially leading to increased instances of identity theft as documents are mishandled or stored insecurely. Moreover, the act of taking identification documents without clear, consistent, and transparent procedures can foster widespread distrust toward FEMA. Already reeling from the crisis at hand, people finding themselves further stripped of their basic documents by a government agency can feel a profound sense of violation and disempowerment. This can damage the rapport between government authorities and communities, making it even more challenging for FEMA to carry out its mission effectively in both the short and long term. Further complicating matters is the issue of data privacy and security. FEMA's track record in handling sensitive information has not always been spotless. There have been instances where data breaches exposed personal details of disaster victims, sowing additional distress. The centralization and potential mishandling of personal identification documents can place vast amounts of sensitive information at risk, possibly leading to exploitation by bad actors. Individuals struck by disaster should not have to worry about whether their personal data is being adequately protected by the very agency meant to help them. Another significant concern is the lack of recourse or accountability when FEMA seizes personal identification documents. Often, in the bureaucratic shuffle and amidst the chaotic backdrop of a disaster scenario, there is little assurance that these documents will be returned promptly or at all. This fear can prevent individuals from seeking the necessary aid, knowing that receiving help might come with the heavy price of losing their primary identification means. 6. Communication devices. In times of crisis, maintaining clear lines of communication becomes paramount, and FEMA often takes stringent measures to ensure command and control. However, one of the more controversial steps FEMA role in managing and mitigating the effects of disasters. This drastic measure aims to mitigate misinformation, prevent panic, and maintain order. Nonetheless, the implications of such actions raise serious concerns about personal freedoms and governmental overreach. FEMA's authorization to confiscate communication devices is rooted in the necessity to manage and control information flow during emergencies. The agency defends this move by emphasizing the importance of preventing the spread of false information, which can exacerbate panic and hinder rescue and relief efforts. However, critics argue that this approach is a direct infringement on individual rights and freedoms, effectively muzzling those who might offer a different perspective on the situation or even report governmental shortcomings. In the interest of maintaining command and control, FEMA's intervention can sometimes cross the line into suppression of legitimate information. For instance, seizing communication devices from journalists and media personnel not only hampers their ability to report on the crisis, but also prevents the public from receiving unbiased updates. This opaque mode of operation raises ethical questions and undermines trust in government agencies. When people are left in the dark, fear and uncertainty amplify, which could be more detrimental than the spread of misinformation itself. Moreover, during crises, personal communication devices such as smartphones and radios become lifelines for affected individuals to connect with their families and seek assistance. Seizing these devices can leave people isolated, unable to inform loved ones about their situation or get critical updates and instructions. The humanitarian fallout from these actions cannot be overlooked, as it compounds the distress and helplessness experienced during emergencies. The potential for abuse of power is also a significant concern. In chaotic situations, distinguishing between necessary seizures and arbitrary grabs can become blurred. This ambiguity can lead to scenarios where authorities could exploit their power, confiscating devices not out of necessity but to stifle dissent or cover up inadequacies in response efforts. Such actions fuel mistrust and can lead to long-term resentment towards governmental agencies like FEMA. Despite FEMA's assurances that such measures are for the greater good, the ethical implications and the risk of overreach present formidable arguments against the blanket authorization to seize communication devices. The delicate balance between maintaining order and respecting individual rights is tipped unfavorably when people's ability to communicate freely is compromised. The notion of a government agency having the power to silence individuals, even temporarily, invites scrutiny and calls for rigorous checks and oversight. 5. Fuel and energy resources. In times of crisis, one of the fundamental resources that FEMA may requisition is fuel and energy resources. This includes gasoline, diesel, natural gas, propane, and other forms of energy critical for powering generators, vehicles, heating systems, and more. While this may seem like a necessary measure to ensure public safety and maintain essential services, the impact on individuals and businesses can be devastating and raises some serious ethical and moral questions. For individuals, the confiscation of fuel can mean the difference between survival and hardship. During emergencies, people rely on fuel to power their cars for evacuation, generators for electricity, and heating systems to stay warm. The sudden loss of these resources can leave families stranded, without light or heat, and unable to access necessary supplies or medical care. This practice disproportionately affects those living in remote areas, where alternative means of energy might not be easily available. Elderly residents, people with disabilities, and those with serious health issues are among the most vulnerable, as their well-being highly depends on a consistent energy supply. Businesses are not spared either. Small and medium enterprises often operate on thin margins and do not possess the extensive backup resources that large corporations might have. For these businesses, fuel and energy resources are essential to maintaining operations, supporting employees, and serving their communities. When FEMA steps in to take these resources, it can lead to an immediate and crippling halt in operations. For instance, farms rely heavily on gasoline and diesel to run tractors and other equipment. Restaurants and grocery stores need stable energy supplies to keep perishable goods fresh. The loss of these resources means not only economic instability but also potential job losses and an interruption in the supply chain that communities rely on. Moreover, the way FEMA exerts its authority to requisition these resources can often feel heavy-handed and intrusive. There are instances where individuals and business owners have reported that they were given little to no notice before their fuel supplies were taken. The lack of communication and the seemingly arbitrary nature of these actions can create a sense of fear and resentment towards the agency. It undermines trust in a time when cooperation and transparency are most needed. When you delve deeper into the bureaucratic procedures and policies that allow FEMA to take control of fuel and energy resources, it becomes clear that the regulation is filled with ambiguities that can be exploited. For example, the criteria used to determine when and where to requisition resources are often not clearly defined, leaving a lot of room for discretionary decision-making. This can lead to accusations of favoritism, inconsistency, and even misuse of power. The psychological and emotional toll on individuals and business owners should not be underestimated. Being left without essential resources during a crisis instills a sense of helplessness and vulnerability. These feelings are compounded when the agency that is supposed to protect and aid the public is perceived as being part of the problem rather than the solution. The resultant anxiety and mistrust can have long-lasting effects on community cohesion and public cooperation in future emergencies. 4. Food and water supplies. When a crisis strikes, food and water supplies are among the first resources to be heavily impacted. Yet, many are surprised to learn that these essential items can also be seized by FEMA during emergencies. Understanding the breadth and rationale behind such actions requires delving into both the stated and unstated intentions of these interventions. Firstly, FEMA's authority to commandeer food and water supplies stems from various emergency powers granted under federal law. The justification given is that during a disaster scenario, ensuring equitable distribution of necessities is paramount. On paper, this seems reasonable. Reallocating supplies can save lives and maintain order in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophe. However, the implementation often paints a different picture, one that veers more towards control and less towards benevolence. Communities have reported instances where FEMA's seizure of supplies has led to scarcity rather than alleviation of needs. Local resources, painstakingly gathered by residents or community groups, are redirected under the guise of central management. These confiscated goods often take circuitous routes through bureaucratic processes, delaying their eventual redistribution. In some scenarios, this has left vulnerable populations who depended on their local stockpiles, suffering longer without the basic sustenance. Further complicating matters is the opaque decision-making process behind these seizures. FEMA's criteria for commandeering supplies remain nebulous at best, leaving the public in the dark regarding why their specific stocks are targeted. This lack of transparency breeds mistrust and frustration, exacerbating the feelings of helplessness during already dire situations. Communities are not just deprived of their resources but also stripped of their autonomy, reliant entirely on federal responses that may be slow or poorly coordinated. Moreover, there have been troubling instances where the seized supplies were not efficiently utilized. Reports and testimonials highlight food and water stocks that have gone to waste, expired, spoiled, or left unused due to bureaucratic mismanagement. These occurrences are not just a squander of precious resources but a painful reminder of inefficiencies that plague large-scale federal interventions. Instead of ameliorating the devastation wrought by natural disasters or other crises, FEMA's actions sometimes seem to compound them. Such episodes starkly reveal the tensions between emergency management and local self-reliance. On one hand, centralized control over resources might make theoretical sense for equitable distribution. On the other, it undermines local efforts where communities have already organized and prepared for emergencies, stripping them of their preparedness. The heavy-handed approach by FEMA can thwart grassroots resilience, potentially rendering local populations more dependent on federal aid in the long run. Critics argue that FEMA's actions are less about emergency relief and more about exerting control. By commandeering essential supplies, the agency consolidates power, dictating the terms of aid and survival. This perspective casts a shadow over FEMA's ostensible mission to protect and support citizens during crises. It suggests that rather than functioning as a guardian, FEMA operates as an overseer, prioritizing control over compassion. 3. Medical supplies. Medical supplies are critical in managing public health emergencies, and it's alarming to consider that FEMA has the authority to requisition these vital resources during a crisis. This capability, under the guise of ensuring widespread public health safety, often translates into significant disruptions in the availability of essential medical items for individuals and healthcare facilities. When FEMA exercises this power, it's not just about stockpiling basic medical supplies. They can also seize advanced medical equipment including ventilators, protective personal equipment (PPE), vaccines, and critical medications. The notion of FEMA stepping in to commandeer these supplies could mean that local hospitals and private practices are left scrambling to find alternatives. When hospitals face shortages, the consequences can be dire. Elective surgeries may be delayed, routine checkups and treatments postponed, and emergency rooms overwhelmed with patients unable to receive the timely care they need. FEMA's approach can often be overly bureaucratic and sluggish, leading to inefficiencies and misallocations. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were numerous reports of FEMA redirecting shipments of PPE that were en route to hospitals and other essential facilities, causing delays and shortages that endangered healthcare workers and patients alike. Such actions hint at a lack of coordination and understanding of ground realities, jeopardizing the health infrastructure's ability to function effectively in crisis situations. Moreover, the disruption extends beyond hospitals and doctors' offices. Pharmacies, home healthcare providers, and even individuals reliant on medical supplies for their daily health management become collateral damage. People with chronic illnesses such as diabetes, heart conditions, or respiratory issues rely on a steady supply of medications and equipment. Yet FEMA's sweeping authority allows them to strip these essential supplies right off the shelves, leaving vulnerable populations without their necessary, often life-saving resources. This power grab doesn't just affect physical supplies. FEMA can also requisition medical staff, pulling doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals from their local communities to serve in federally designated areas. While this may seem beneficial on the surface, the actual result can be a reduction in medical care availability in the communities left behind. Local clinics and hospitals may find themselves understaffed, unable to offer the same level of care, and facing increased wait times and patient loads. The ethics of FEMA taking control of medical supplies during a crisis are deeply questionable. While the agency's goal may be to prevent a broader public health disaster, this centralized control strategy can lead to a disproportionate distribution of resources, where some areas are glaringly undersupplied. In past instances, there have been claims of favoritism and political bias influencing, where and how supplies are redistributed, casting shadows on the impartiality and efficacy of FEMA's actions. 2. Private property. In times of crisis, the Federal Emergency Management Agency possesses the authority to seize private property, a power that has startled many homeowners and business proprietors. This includes a broad range of properties, from residential homes and commercial buildings to vehicles and even land. The justification for such actions typically revolves around the necessity for emergency response, temporary shelter, or resources required to manage and mitigate the aftermath of a disaster. However, the implications for property owners are profound and far-reaching. One of the most jarring examples of property seizure is the potential for FEMA to commandeer private residences. In a scenario where emergency shelters are overwhelmed, FEMA can legally force homeowners to vacate their properties, transforming them into temporary housing for displaced individuals. This can occur with little to no prior notice, placing homeowners in precarious and often distressing situations. Imagine the stress and disruption of being ousted from your home during an already difficult time, with the uncertainty of when or if you will regain access. Commercial properties are not immune from these measures either. Businesses, particularly those that possess buildings suitable for mass occupancy or storage, can find themselves under FEMA's purview. In the chaos following a significant disaster, FEMA has the authority to repurpose commercial warehouses for storing critical supplies or convert office buildings into makeshift medical facilities or coordination centers. For business owners, this can mean an abrupt cessation of operations, leading to significant financial losses and potential bankruptcy, without straightforward avenues for redress or compensation. Additionally, vehicles, whether personal or commercial, can be requisitioned by FEMA under their emergency powers. In scenarios requiring mass evacuation or transportation of emergency supplies, FEMA might seize private cars, trucks, or even specialized vehicles without the owner's consent. This can leave individuals and businesses without critical means of transportation at a time when mobility is most needed. The legal justification behind these actions is found in the powers granted to FEMA under various statutes and executive orders. These include the National Emergencies Act and the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, among others. Such laws are designed to ensure swift and efficient response during emergencies, prioritizing communal safety and welfare over individual property rights. Nevertheless, from the perspective of those affected, this often feels like a significant overreach, breeding distrust and resentment. Property owners might be eligible for reimbursement, but this process is fraught with complications and delays. The legal framework dictates that FEMA should provide just compensation for seized properties, but determining the value of the property can be contentious and prolonged. Many property owners have reported receiving far less than the market value or enduring lengthy bureaucratic processes to claim their entitlements. The inefficiencies in the reimbursement process only add to the trauma and financial hardship already inflicted by the disaster. 1. Personal vehicles. In times of crisis, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has the authority to seize personal vehicles, which can have far-reaching consequences for individuals and families. This often overlooked power can be exercised under the guise of ensuring the greater good, but the impact on the affected citizens is substantial and usually detrimental. Understanding the circumstances under which FEMA can take vehicles reveals the extent to which individual freedoms can be compromised during emergencies. FEMA typically enacts this measure when an area is declared a disaster zone and the immediate mobilization of resources is deemed necessary. The agency may confiscate personal vehicles to clear roadways, transport supplies, or evacuate residents. While the intention might be to mitigate the crisis effectively, the strategy overlooks the critical dependence individuals have on their vehicles. Many families rely on their cars not just for transportation, but as an essential part of their daily lives for getting to work, taking children to school, and even in some cases, as their mobile homes. For individuals living paycheck to paycheck, the loss of a vehicle can be financially disastrous. Without their means of transportation, they may be unable to get to work, leading to potential job loss at a time when financial stability is crucial. The unpredictability of a car's return further exacerbates this issue, as there is often no clear timeline for when or if the vehicle will be returned. This lack of communication and transparency can add stress to families already dealing with the fallout of a disaster. Moreover, seizing personal vehicles can hinder the ability of families to evacuate or move to safety autonomously. Instead of empowering citizens to take charge of their safety, This authority effectively makes them dependent on the response efforts of FEMA, which might not always be timely or adequately resourced. This dependency can create bottlenecks and delays in the evacuation process, putting lives at greater risk. The emotional toll is another significant, albeit less acknowledged, factor. During emergencies, the uncertainty and fear can take a heavy psychological toll on individuals and families. Losing a vehicle, often seen as a lifeline during such times, can compound the emotional strain. The sense of powerlessness and lack of control can lead to increased stress, anxiety, and even mental health issues, casting a long shadow over the survivor's ability to cope with the crisis. FEMA's authority to seize personal vehicles can also result in questionable ethical practices. Instances of perceived misuse of this power, where vehicles are taken from those who might not be directly affected by the immediate crisis, have surfaced in the past. Such actions raise concerns about accountability and abuse of power. When individuals witness what seems like arbitrary confiscation of their property, it fuels distrust and resentment towards the very agency meant to protect them.